Last week I talked about the corporate virtue signalling, which often takes the form of supporting some type of diversity initiative, such as the embrace of same-sex marriage by Qantas. But there is another common form of virtue signalling that is known as greenwashing, from that same Quillette article from last week. Greenwashing is where companies expend more effort appearing to be green than actually implementing environmentally friendly policies. Here, ethics are not driving the decision-making, rather they're being used as a way of marketing that the company is acting for the greater good. So it's probably not completely accurate to say AGL is greenwashing. They are investing more in renewable energy sources and away from coal. But there is more than just a bit of marketing spin going on here. What do I mean? Well, first, who is AGL? AGL is Australia's largest electricity generation provider with a market cap of about $15 billion, and they recorded net profit of just over $500 million for the fiscal year ended June 2017. They have a diverse power generation portfolio, including base, peaking and intermediate generation plants spreading across traditional thermal generation, as well as renewable sources including hydro, wind, solar, landfill gas and biomass. They also operate natural gas storage facilities and a coal seam gas extraction and processing facility at Camden, New South Wales. And if you take a look around their website, you'll see lots of images of solar panels and wind farms. Their latest annual report has more of the same and asks, "Are you with us?" in reference to their commitment to get out of the coal business and invest in renewables. If you watch Australian TV, and I don't recommend you do too much of that, you may have seen the AGL commercial starring the bearded hipster touting AGL's green credentials. Here it is.
Let's be honest, things need to change. So at AGL, we are getting out of coal, starting 2022 and ending 2050. We can't just switch off today or things won't switch on tomorrow. So we've started a fund that will put up to $3 billion into making renewable energy for everyone. We already run Australia's largest solar and wind farms, but this is just the beginning. We need to innovate and make it affordable. Because sustainable energy that isn't affordable isn't sustainable. And all with no compromises for you. Easy to manage with round-the-clock support. As one of the biggest energy companies, we can create the biggest change. So, you with us?
Now, I should say I have nothing against an energy company going green if that's the way they want to go. I do think it's somewhat hypocritical, though, to paint yourself as green while you derive the majority of your electricity generation from coal, and will continue to do so for at least a decade or more into the future. On page 17 of AGL's latest annual report, we learn that they will not totally exit their coal assets until 2050. They're scheduled to close the Liddell plant in 2022, Bayswater in 2035 and Loy Yang in 2048. The fact is, more than 85% of Australia's electricity generation still comes from coal and gas. And I'm a fan of renewable energy. I think it'd be fantastic if we were able to cover all our energy generation needs from low-cost renewables. But I'm also a realist, and I know that renewables simply can't provide the baseload capacity needed for a national electricity grid, let alone compete on cost, or at least not yet. Just look at South Australia. Premier Jay Weatherill has led that state down fantasy lane to a green energy utopia. And what has he got in return? The highest electricity prices in the world, with New South Wales, Queensland and Victoria all making the top 10. That's a stunning accomplishment given that Australia ranked alongside the United States and Canada with the lowest retail prices in the world just 20 years ago. And that's despite having hundreds of years' supply of coal, 40% of the world's uranium and an abundance of natural gas. But back to AGL. More recently, they've been in the news for their unwillingness to consider extending the life or even a sale to a third party of the Liddell coal-fired power plant set to close at the end of its useful life in 2022. They claim the plant would need significant capital investment that would make it uneconomical. AGL plans to invest more in renewables, but that won't come anywhere near close to replacing the capacity of Liddell. For example, the two existing AGL solar farms in Western New South Wales generate just 4% of the capacity of Liddell. But remember, AGL is an electricity retailer, not just a generator. So does it really matter to AGL if they can't replace the capacity? Less capacity means higher retail prices. The CEO of AGL claims that coal can't compete with renewables on price. Technology is driving this. We don't see any baseload other than renewables. He said the economics of renewables would continue to come down because of economies of scale. You'll hear people say, no, coal can compete, but I've looked at the numbers and come to decisions that are going to direct billions of dollars of investment. I've looked at it pretty hard. Well, something else Mr. Vesey has no doubt looked at pretty hard is the approximately $500 million worth of subsidies Australian taxpayers will pay to AGL to fund its flagship solar generators. They've already secured $230 million in direct grants and are forecast to gain far more under the renewable energy target. In fact, the renewable energy target has delivered subsidies of $9 billion to renewable projects in recent years and will receive another $36 billion until the year 2030. And we're told those subsidies are locked in by legislation. But of course, the best part is that you, the average punter, is paying for those subsidies in the form of the highest electricity prices in the world. And here's a great example of the complete lack of bang for buck these subsidies help generate. The Moree Solar Farm in New South Wales has received a $102 million taxpayer grant and a $60 million taxpayer-funded concessional loan and will receive $141 million in production subsidies by 2030. Is this a good investment? No. In the next 13 years, the project will receive more than $300 million in subsidies, but deliver about 1.45% of the output of the Hazelwood power station that closed in Victoria earlier this year. Oh, and that project is owned by a Saudi solar tycoon. And many will argue Hazelwood, like AGL does about Liddell, that it was too old to continue and too costly to upgrade. Well, of course they are. You've effectively priced them out of the market with all the government subsidies directed at renewables. So if renewable energy is cheaper, Mr. Vesey, how about letting it compete? What's that? Because we won't meet our obligations under the Paris Treaty? You mean that same reduction in emissions that Chief Scientist Alan Finkel says will do nothing to reduce global temperatures? Okay then, here's what Senator David Leyonhjelm had to say about the AGL situation on Sky News recently.
For them to sort of say, well, we don't care what happens, whether there's enough electricity or not, because we don't like coal and we're getting out of coal, I think is grossly irresponsible.
So you think
at
it's
the
an
very least.
ideological view rather than an economic one?
Well, they're advertising, we're getting out of coal. It's actually a bit of a lie because they're not getting out of coal for about 40 years or something like that. But clearly they have a problem with continuing in the coal sector. And yet, if they close down Liddell or they won't even entertain ideas about how to keep it open, there's going to be 2,000 megawatts of electricity, which we're not going to have. And there are people already who can't pay their electricity bills. And, people are really paying big time for electricity. It's causing terrific harm. I'm very angry with AGL. I'm actually going to close my account with them in Sydney and go to another supplier. This idea that, we're getting out of coal, it's garbage. It's absolute nonsense. We've got a 1,000-year supply of coal in this country, by far the cheapest way to generate electricity. And unless they start advocating for nuclear power, AGL are not serious. This is nonsense. You can't have windmills and damn turbines, solar panels replacing coal. You can't do that.
You don't think AGL's responding to a market? And as you say, the line on their bill is, "Are you with us? We're getting out of coal." They've probably made a educated guess, or a marketing strategy on where they think public opinion is.
Well, public opinion wants to keep the lights on. That's where I think public opinion is. It's all very well to talk in theory about how your coal is generated, but if there isn't enough electricity, then wherever it comes from is good.
And at the end of the day, that's what the average punter cares about, keeping the lights on. And if it costs them more and more to do that, then their patience will wear thin for subsidising costly renewables that can't deliver, and even more so for governments that continue to promote these policies. If AGL is virtue signalling its green credentials, Australia is performing one giant virtue signal for global warming. And I say that as someone that believes in man-made global warming. Australia's woeful energy situation comes down to one almighty failure of government policy. But of course, instead of recognising that the best thing the government could do is to get out of the way, they're busy trying to come up with a new policy that I'm betting will do very little to reduce your electricity bills in the near future. So, in the absence of generous taxpayer subsidies, would AGL be as committed to a green energy future? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you next time.